So motivation then really is kind of the driving force behind our behavior and performance. So when people think of motivation, they think of it as, this kind of drive, this enthusiasm, this willingness to try and do or engage in a behavior. But a more kind of formal definition is the ability to kind of initiate and persist at a task. So really engaging in an activity or behavior over kind of a period of time, and also having the willingness to do it as well. When people think of motivation, they think of it maybe as an amount. So maybe athlete A has more motivation compared to athlete B. And that's correct in some aspects, but it's really about kind of the type of motivation. So research done by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci looks at kind of two types of motivation. So you have extrinsic motivation, and this really is where an athlete engages in a behavior for rewards. So it could be a prize, recognition from others. It's a huge one for athletes. So that could be a coach, other performers, you as a parent, and kind of the status that comes with being the best. Because that's really a huge kind of boost to an athlete's self-esteem and their confidence. Or it can be about avoiding punishments as well. So athletes, again, with those significant others, don't want to disappoint their coach, their parent, other performers, whoever it may be. And it's really these external factors that act as a strong motivator for the athlete. The second type is intrinsic motivation. This is really where an athlete engages in a behavior because it's personally rewarding. So this is really engaging in an activity because of the enjoyment, and the enjoyment is the reward for the person or the athlete. So it's really about the kind of personal growth and development in this case. So hopefully this picture illustrates, you see the extrinsic motivated athlete who's kind of thinking about that first place, that reward that comes with winning. Whereas with intrinsic motivated athletes, they're thinking about the enjoyment, the fun element of their sport, and the reason they kind of got into the sport in the first place. Interestingly though, athletes can engage in the same behavior, but have kind of different purposes for it. So for example, take training. An athlete may go to training from an extrinsic point of view because they want to demonstrate to the coach, to the other paddlers within their squad, that they're the best. Whereas from an intrinsic point of view, it's more about that personal reward, that wanting to give their best effort, wanting to improve, and developing their skill, things they have control over. So both these types of motivation definitely have an effect on how we see our goals as well. And this leads me to talk about goal orientations. And this comes from research from Nichols and other researchers. And they talk about ego. So being ego-oriented is where an athlete wants to demonstrate they're the best. So they want to beat or outperform others. They want to be rewarded, again, with that prize, whether it's money, sponsorship, whatever it may be. And you'll normally hear athletes say things such as, I measure my success by my results or the outcome of my performance. And that's very kind of ego-oriented. And this really does kind of help with that competitiveness and that drive to really beat opponents. Whereas on the other hand, you have mastery. This is really about an athlete who wants to improve, an athlete who wants to give their best effort. And you'll hear an athlete say, I kind of measure my success by my skill development. So it's really about demonstrating that athlete development rather than, those external factors. And you can see here how these both link to kind of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. With ego, it's really about those external factors. So it links closer to extrinsic motivation. Whereas with mastery, it's more about that kind of pride, that those internal factors. So it definitely links to intrinsic motivation. But a question that gets asked quite a lot, it's which one is best? And kind of the honest answer is that it's good to have both, but the underlying preferable motivation will be mastery, or should be mastery. Because although ego, when it's used correctly, it can be a very strong fuel for an athlete. If it's continued to be used over time, or the most prevalent, it can cause quite a lot of anxiety because the athlete starts thinking about the outcome, and that can be quite tough and quite puts a lot of pressure on the athlete, especially when it comes to those crunch moments in performance. So mastery is definitely better for the long term. because it helps to keep that ego, those fears, those anxieties at bay. So you can see how mastery is definitely kind of better for the long term. Although athletes will inevitably face setbacks, disappointment within their careers, so keeping a theme of kind of the ego and mastery orientations, with an athlete who's kind of ego focused, they may have this fear of failure because they've maybe not done something so well in the past. They're kind of focusing on what they might make a mistake. They may, thinking about the things that they may not achieve rather than what they can achieve, and what is possible. They see their kind of performance as a threat, maybe. And this leads to them maybe avoiding challenges. You'll see it with some athletes in training. They'll rather kind of take the easy option rather than trying to test their capabilities, because that can actually lead to failure. And you'll see it with athletes who maybe make excuses. They'll say things such as, the weather's bad, so why try? Athletes with this kind of focus would rather not try because failure to them, it's quite personal. They take it not just as an athlete, but as a person. And you can see how that can be quite damaging to their self-identity. And you'll see it quite a lot with younger athletes earlier in their careers. However, with mastery, they're more likely to be persistent after failure. They want to understand why, the reasons they didn't do so well, and try and attack it and challenge themselves to go and do it again and overcome the setback. Surprisingly enough, these are people who actively seek challenges. So again, with that training example, these are the athletes who want to kind of challenge themselves, push themselves to the limit, see what they can actually try and achieve, and then kind of go again. And athletes in failure in this kind of instant, they see failure as kind of a learning opportunity. So, for example, an athlete may not do so well on a section of a course or a certain part of the race, but they'll say to themselves, well, at least I know what to do next time. And if an athlete's unsure, you'll see the more proactive athletes are definitely the ones who, ask the coach, what can I do next time? If I'm in the situation again, what's kind of my go-to move? And you can see how mastery definitely helps to kind of build that resilience from setbacks compared to ego. And resilience is definitely a key skill of an athlete being successful. So again, with that kind of mastery mindset, that intrinsic motivation, it's really about helping that long-term motivation. So we talked quite a lot about, mastery and how it can help motivation, but what kind of characteristics are kind of the best athletes using? What's kind of their optimal motivation? How do they be motivated? How do they stay motivated, especially when times kind of get tough? Things such as being approach rather than avoidance. This is really talking about having the motivation to do what you want to do rather than what you're trying to avoid. And this can help an athlete in a kind of pressure situation. So they're embracing pressure rather than avoiding it. Because in a competition, it's definitely going to be there regardless. And if you're using this with your motivation, you're going to be stronger and more motivated to strive towards your goals. Being active rather than passive really talks about an athlete really taking charge and not waiting for things to happen. It's about them being in charge of their own development and not just kind of being directed to by the coach, and being proactive and making motivation personal. Because I think the thing about motivation, the more personal it is, the more likely the person is going to engage in that behavior, and more chance of being successful. And this kind of leads me on to saying, I think sometimes athletes forget to kind of do it for themselves. I think they try to kind of please their coach, a parent, whoever it may be. And, it's okay to be selfish sometimes. Satisfy your own needs before thinking about others. Because the more personal, again, with that motivation, the more personal you make it, the better and the more you enjoy it. Being positive rather than negative is definitely easier said than done. But it really is about enjoying rather than kind of the desperation. And as a parent, here's where you can come in and ask, your child, are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you enjoying your motivation? Are you motivated for the right reasons? If not, then maybe this can be something that you can change. And being internal rather than external is really talking about that intrinsic motivation, that kind of pride, that enjoyment, gaining interest and satisfaction from achieving something personally rather than focusing on those external rewards that come with success. And finally, self-determined. This looks at if an athlete is driven by maybe some external rewards, have control over the behavior, allow them to try and have control over what they can do. So focusing on things such as their warm up, things they can control, their own performance, instead of focusing on kind of the outcome and what other people are doing. And this is definitely a kind of an ideal list. So maybe it's something athletes can try and strive for. So they shouldn't be worried if they don't have all of these characteristics now. But as parents, it's important to try and encourage these behaviors, these sort of thought patterns, as this is going to lead to kind of the most optimally motivated athlete, and also sustained as well over a long period of time. I also thought it was important to kind of include a section on staying motivated. This kind of COVID situation has had a huge impact. Races have been cancelled, postponed, and also on us kind of as a person globally, people have had impacts on their work, their relationships, our thoughts and feelings, and motivation is definitely a part of that. I've kind of questioned myself in the last 12 or so weeks about my own work, and I've really had to find ways to kind of stay motivated and reasons to kind of continue with my work. So I thought it was important to kind of include this for athletes, but also how parents can kind of facilitate this, ways to kind of stay motivated. So the first point looks at seeing this as kind of an opportunity gained rather than missed. So allow athletes to use this as a chance to work on their strengths and kind of improve on their weaknesses. And as parents, definitely encourage your athletes to talk to their coaches, because athletes may sometimes think they know their kind of strengths and their weaknesses, but having that conversation with a coach and facilitating that can definitely, there could be something in there where they find information that goes, okay, yeah, maybe I need to do this to actually improve my performance further. And you as a parent can definitely encourage that going forward. Set new goals. Goals are definitely exciting, especially long-term goals. They can really be a huge fuel for an athlete. But it really is about those kind of short and medium-term goals. And as a parent, I think it's very important to focus on these kind of daily processes that lead to the long-term goal, because these goals can definitely be really exciting, and making sure that your child is realistic, but also actually enjoying their goals. Because if they're not, then maybe they need to adapt it or change them. Reminding yourself why an athlete gets into canoeing in the first place. Luckily enough, I was be able to be present on a talk from Fiona Penny, a slalom athlete, who's been talking to some of the Ent slalom squad a couple of weeks ago. And she, throughout her career, talked about she had to remind herself why she got into canoeing in the first place. And it really was about that fun, that enjoyment. I could think of Michael Johnson, the American Olympic sprinter. He talks about his best motivation comes from the pure enjoyment of running, and having that same feeling he was when he was 10 years old. And he talks about it's not about, you've never seen a 10-year-old ever burn out. It's really about finding that initial motivation and the reason you became a paddler in the first place. And that's kind of the key to kind of persevering and staying motivated. And I think that's the point Fiona was getting at, hence why she's had such a long and successful career over the last 20 years or so. A huge one here is really finding time to switch off. We've probably never had as much time to switch off in the last 3 months. But really, when athletes go back to training, it's really about trying to find a balance between canoeing and having a life. Again, I was lucky enough last week to be on a call with Joe Clark, who was talking to our Ent slalom squad. And he was talking about there was a time where he was just training too much. So he took about a week off, just spent time with family, with friends. And this really helped him going forward because he came back even more motivated. He was re-energized. And I think the point he was getting at was having balance between canoeing and life. And definitely as a parent, definitely encourage your child to, socialize with friends, do other things, hobbies that have nothing to do with canoeing, because when they come back, it allows them to recharge their batteries first of all. But when they come back, they're more likely to be motivated going forward. So I think these are just a few tips here I thought it would be kind of appropriate to include, that parents can do and athletes can do as well. My parents are here to kind of facilitate these thoughts, these behaviors with their own child. But my kind of top tips then for parents, first one includes understanding your child's goals. Ask them what was good about their performance or training. Ask what was positive. I think it's important to acknowledge the negative stuff, but don't dwell on it. Focusing more on the positive stuff, you'll be able to, reaffirm that positivity in your child's paddling. And the more questions you ask, the better placed you are to understand, and then ultimately help your child kind of be motivated in the first place and stay motivated over their career. Praise the process. It's probably the favorite sentence we use in Enter Fly Squad. But it is really about praise for things such as efforts, improvement, saying things such as, you've improved on this aspect of your paddling compared to 6 to 12 months ago, and seeing that progress. It's definitely going to help to promote this kind of mastery, this climate with your child as they go forward, and hopefully they'll be able to take that on instead of focusing on the outcome, focusing on the result, which can, as I said before, be quite anxiety inducing. Encourage your child to have, goals, and encourage them to self-reflect on their own goals. I've seen it with athletes before. They've had diaries, they've had logs. And I think it's really about a parent giving control to the athlete, because, when people have goals set for them, they're probably not as motivated as when it comes from themselves. And again, that links back to that intrinsic motivation. But really, with their self-reflection on goals, if they're not achieving something along the way to one of their goals, sit down with them and have a look back, and you'll be able to maybe identify that. And if not, again, I encourage you to talk with coaches about these sort of goals and topics. And probably the biggest thing you can do as a parent is keep things in perspective. Celebrate the successes. It's actually okay. I think some people think sometimes it's not okay to celebrate successes. But really, when you do celebrate successes, it's really about the way you do it. So help your child to understand the reasons they were successful. Was it the things such as, oh, well, yeah, you did well today because you're the best paddler? Or was it because they got a good night's sleep before? They were eating the right things on the day of competition. They did a really thorough warm-up. They were really concentrated or focused during the morning of the race. Focusing on these processes is definitely going to help the child kind of want to reuse these behaviors in forward and motivate them to do well. On the flip side of that, don't dwell on the failures. So you are there as a parent to give that kind of unconditional support, and it's really not kind of the end of the world, although it may feel like it for the athlete in the kind of immediate aftermath. You as a parent are kind of giving that perspective and keeping them balanced. And as a parent as well, it's important to reaffirm that failure is a chance for learning. So saying things such as, okay, maybe you didn't do so well this time, but now you know what to do next time when it comes to the same situation. So I hope these kind of tips are quite practical for you to use as a parent, and you can apply them to your own child. So kind of my final thoughts then as we come to an end to this webinar. We've kind of gone through what motivation is, the different types, how to kind of use it when we face setbacks, how to kind of be optimally motivated, and how you as a parent can help your child be motivated and stay as motivated as possible, as long as possible throughout their career. So promoting intrinsic motivation is definitely better for the long-term development. These are the best athletes. These are the ones who are focusing on themselves and what they can do, and taking real pride and enjoyment And the more motivated you are in this way, the more likely you are to kind of be successful. Motivation is definitely personal to each individual, and that's why I think I was making the point before about really trying to understand your child's goals, because the more you understand, the better placed you are to try and help them keep that motivation going. And parents are definitely vital in helping to create a mastery climate. You play a key role away from competition and training. And if you're reinforcing those things, such as the process, and not thinking about the outcome and the result, or just times, they're definitely more likely to take that back into the performance environment when they go back into training and competition. And I'll just end here on a quote from Steve Bankson, who's an NCAA basketball coach in the United States. He talks about it's not the push from behind or the pull from the front, but rather the drive from within. And he's really talking about that internal drive, that intrinsic motivation. These are the athletes who kind of sustain their motivation over a longer period of time. So that's kind of it from me today. I really hope you've enjoyed that webinar on motivation. Anyone who's kind of listening after today, please feel free to email me if you want to talk about motivation or any other topics. My email's there on the bottom right hand side of the screen. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions now. Thanks very much for listening.
So thank you, Ryan, for delivering that really interesting webinar today. So now's an opportunity for anybody, if you want to ask any particular questions around this particular topic of motivation, there's a chat feature at the top there, and so please feel free to drop your questions in that chat feature, and Ryan can answer them for yourself. Ryan, I've got a couple of questions that have come through in the pre-webinar sign-up. So whilst we wait for any questions from anybody, the first question that I have is, are there any tools that are effective to keep motivation going if an athlete was to get an injury?
Yeah, I think goal setting is a huge one. Definitely having, as I talked about before, those kind of long-term goals. They can be a huge fuel for someone. So wanting to achieve maybe a personal best or win a certain race or event, but it's really about those kind of short-term goals and in between that lead up to the long-term goal. So focusing on, firstly with the rehab, how they're going to get stronger back to their kind of normal level of performance. And I think it's really important for a parent as well. This is where they kind of play even bigger role, giving them perspective on that they're not going to be training at the same level when they go back to training, and keeping them motivated. And it's really about kind of staying motivated. So goal setting is definitely a huge one.
Great, thank you. We have another question that come through on the pre-webinar sign up, and that question is, are there any tools or strategies that parents can use to keep younger children motivated, so their attention is probably more towards online video games, etc.? So how can a parent help their child to keep a younger child to keep themselves motivated?
Yeah, I think it's trying to find a balance between having a kind of normal life and canoeing, and it's really about setting, again, you can set goals within your child's kind of canoeing, their own career, and focusing them there and focusing on their own athlete development, but then also allowing them to have time off. And I really encourage kind of parents to encourage their child to kind of have a log or diary, because once, especially even at a younger age, once an athlete is able to kind of see their own progress, and are writing things down, such as how they were doing in training, certain performances, I think that's definitely going to help keep their attention span. It is difficult with younger athletes, but kind of the earlier you can introduce it, the more they're going to use it as they kind of mature and go throughout their career.
Great, thank you for that. So we haven't had any more questions come through on the chat feature. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat feature there. There will be some additional resources around this particular topic area of motivation that will be uploaded onto the Parent Programme Additional Resources tab. So there's a couple of different academic research that's out there around this topic of motivation. a couple of different articles from a lady called Marion Davis, who's presented actually at the British Canoeing Coaches Conference last year. So definitely worth a look at there. So thank you once again for delivering the webinar today, Ryan, and thank you everybody else for tuning in and logging in today and listening to this webinar.